Apologize to my sister right now, or you're done in this house. That's what my husband said to me. He said it across a table of 14 people, in a voice designed to end conversations rather than start them, on a Saturday evening in mid-September, in the house that my father spent his entire working life making possible for me. His younger sister sat 2 seats away, with her arms folded across her chest and a smile on her face that I had been watching for 6 years. The particular smile of a person who has learned that someone else will always step in to do the damage on her behalf. She thought I was about to break. So did he, so did everyone at that table. What none of them knew was what I had found in a filing cabinet 3 hours before the first guest knocked on our door. My name is Miriam. I'm 36 years old, and I have been married to a man named Damien for 6 years. I want to be honest about those 6 years, because the honest version is more complicated than I would have liked. He was not a monster when we met. He was funny and perceptive and the kind of person who remembered the small things. The coffee order, the anniversary of a difficult day, the name of the colleague I had mentioned once in passing. I loved him genuinely, and I don't say that as a footnote. I say it because I think it matters, in the accounting of how things go wrong, to name the thing that made them right once. What I missed in those early years was the hierarchy. Damien's family had one, invisible to outsiders, legible only once you'd spent enough time inside it. At the top was Damien himself, and just behind him, always behind him but never quite separate from him, was his younger sister Waverly. 2 years his junior, 34, when this story ends. She ran a small interior design boutique out of Mississauga that had a beautiful Instagram presence, and, I would later understand, a set of financial books that did not reflect reality in any consistent way. Waverly could be charming. I want to be fair about that too. She was witty and aesthetically sharp, and she could hold a room's attention the way certain people can, through some combination of confidence and timing and the appearance of complete ease. What she could not do, what she had never once attempted in my presence, was acknowledge that someone else might also be worthy of consideration. She moved through life in a kind of permanent first-class cabin, and she had never, as far as I could tell, checked whether her fellow passengers were actually seated in it. Over 6 years, I had learned how she operated. A comment about my choices that landed just between observation and criticism, so that any objection on my part seemed oversensitive. A redirect mid-conversation, whenever I said something she didn't want discussed. A habit of involving Damien in any disagreement between us in a way that framed her grievance and my reaction simultaneously, so that by the time the story reached him, I was already the difficult one. Damien absorbed all of it without, I think, understanding he was absorbing anything. He loved his sister in the automatic, unexamined way of someone who had never been required to interrogate the relationship. That kind of love makes people useful without their knowing it. I said less and less over time. This is the part I am least proud of. The dinner that September was a birthday party. Damien's 40th. I had planned it for 3 months. 14 close friends and family, a menu I had spent 2 weekends testing. A cake from the Portuguese bakery on Queen Street East because it was his favorite. A table set with cloth napkins and the good crystal I kept for occasions that were supposed to matter. I mention these details not to establish my virtue, but to place the evening correctly. It was mine, the planning and the labor and the intention of it, and Damien had seemed grateful. Waverly arrived 45 minutes late and walked in as though she were the one hosting. She rearranged the bar cart within 10 minutes of arriving, moving the wine bottles without asking, because she thought the layout was inefficient. She told my closest friend, in a bright, carrying voice, that the charcuterie board was very 2019 but fun. She spent the first hour of dinner talking exclusively about a renovation project in Forest Hill. A client's kitchen, the imported tile, the difficulty of sourcing the correct shade of soapstone, while making brief, efficient eye contact with the room to ensure everyone was listening. I poured wine. I brought out the next course. I smiled at the table and told myself we were almost through the difficult part. The moment that ended my silence was not the bar cart. It was not the comment about the charcuterie. It was the moment Waverly turned to my mother, who had driven 3.5 hours from Kingston to be there, and who was sitting quietly at the far end of the table with the careful posture she maintains when she is trying not to be a burden to anyone. And said, with the generosity of someone bestowing a consolation prize, "Your casserole is so homey. You can always tell when something is made with love instead of, actual skill." My mother smiled and said, "Thank you." And I set down my fork. "Waverly," I said, and my own voice surprised me with how level it was. "I'd like you to give the room a break." She looked at me. "I'm sorry?" "I'm asking you to stop speaking to my mother that way at my dinner table," I said, clearly and directly, so there's no confusion about what I'm asking. Damien's chair moved. I heard it before I saw him, the way you hear the intake of breath before a sentence that changes something. He turned to me with his jaw set in the expression I recognized from every other time he had decided his family needed defending, and he said the words that would, though neither of us knew it yet, be the last ultimatum he would ever give me. "Apologize to my sister," he said, "right now, or you're done in this house." I looked at him. The table had gone entirely silent. 14 people doing the thing people do in these moments, finding a great deal of sudden interest in their plates, their wine glasses, the middle distance. My mother's hands, resting near her knife, had gone absolutely still. Waverly leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, and waited for the outcome she had seen so many times before. What my husband did not know was that the woman sitting across from him was not the same person who had woken up in that house that morning. Let me explain. That afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I had gone into Damien's home office looking for our house insurance renewal documents. We had passed the reminder date by nearly 2 weeks, and every time I had asked Damien to find the file, he had said he would get to it, and then didn't. With guests arriving in 4 hours and a kitchen that needed my full attention, I decided to find the documents myself. Damien kept his filing cabinet locked. He kept the key in a small ceramic bowl on the second shelf of his bookcase. A bowl I had made in a pottery class in our second year together, painted with uneven blue stripes because I was not then, and am not now, a natural artist. I noticed this detail and found it briefly, absurdly funny, even in the middle of everything that came after. I found the key, unlocked the cabinet, and located the insurance folder in the third drawer without any difficulty. I was about to close the drawer when I noticed, tucked flat along the bottom beneath a rubber-banded stack of what appeared to be old tax returns, a cream-colored envelope with the Ontario Land Titles Office logo printed in the upper left corner. I almost put it back. I almost didn't open it at all. Inside was a refinancing agreement dated 22 months prior. It was for the house in the Beaches. My house, the house I had purchased outright with the proceeds of my father's estate, held for 5 years in a registered account specifically designated for me in his will before I drew it down for the purchase. The original title had my name on it. Only my name. The refinancing agreement had Damien's name on it as the primary applicant. There was a signature line for the property owner, and the signature on that line was supposed to be mine. It was not mine. I sat on the floor of his office for what might have been 3 minutes, or might have been 15. I genuinely couldn't have told you. The light through the window was the particular slant of late afternoon in September, honey-colored and very still, and I sat in it with a document in my hands that was asking me to accept a version of my own life I had never been consulted about. I felt the grief of it arrive, and then, in the same few minutes, begin to settle into something else, something colder and clearer. Then I started looking at everything else. There was a bank statement clipped behind the refinancing agreement from a home equity line of credit attached to the property as collateral, an account I had never been told existed. Over the past 19 months, $89,000 had been withdrawn from it in amounts ranging between $4,000 and $12,000 at intervals of several weeks, all transfers to the same recipient. A numbered Ontario Corporation, 1847392 Ontario Limited. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I put the envelope back exactly as I had found it, locked the cabinet, replaced the key in the ceramic bowl, and went to the kitchen to finish preparing the appetizers. Then I sat at the kitchen island and spent the next 22 minutes doing what the situation required. I found the Ontario Business Registry through Service Ontario and searched the numbered company. It was registered to a director whose full legal name I recognized immediately: my sister-in-law. My husband was listed as a secondary director. I called a real estate lawyer I found through the Law Society of Ontario's referral directory. She answered on the second ring, listened without interrupting while I explained what I had found, and told me she could have an emergency application prepared and submitted to the Superior Court of Justice by end of business Monday, and that she would send a formal notice letter to Damien's email by end of evening, confirming the property was under active legal dispute. Then I called the Canada Revenue Agency's business tip line and reported the numbered company's registration number, the pattern of transfers I had documented, and my sister-in-law's name in relation to the business filings. The intake agent was thorough and unhurried. She confirmed the report had been logged and that a compliance officer would be in contact within 5 business days. The CRA takes these calls seriously, especially when they involve a small business with irregular GST, HST remittances, and a numbered holding company receiving large, irregular transfers. I thanked her. I ended the call. I washed my hands, went to answer the front door, and hosted a dinner party for 4 hours. So, when my husband told me to apologize or consider myself done in my own house, I breathed in slowly. I felt the table watching me. I felt Waverley's certainty radiating from 2 seats away like something physical. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The sound of it, the chair legs on the hardwood, was very loud in a room that had already gone quiet. I walked around the table without rushing. Each step was deliberate, not performed, not theatrical, just the walk of someone who has already decided exactly what she is going to do and is now simply doing it. I stopped beside Waverley's chair and leaned down until my mouth was close to her ear. "I know about the numbered company," I said quietly. "I know about the $89,000. The CRA tip line received a formal report about your business filings this afternoon, because I made that call myself." I felt her go rigid. "I also know," I continued, keeping my voice just above a whisper, "that the refinancing documents in your brother's filing cabinet have a signature on them that is supposed to be mine. That's title fraud under Ontario law. My lawyer filed the emergency application this afternoon." I straightened up and looked at her. What happened to Waverley's face in the next few seconds was the most honest I had ever seen her be. The composure collapsed entirely, not gradually, not piece by piece, but all at once, like something that had been held up by a single point of tension finally letting go. The polished ease was gone, the idle authority was gone. What was left was fear. Genuine, undisguised, unmistakable fear. Her hands found the edge of the table and gripped it. The color had left her face completely. Her phone, sitting face up on the table in front of her, had begun to vibrate with incoming calls she was not answering. "What did you say to her?" Damien's voice, from the far end of the table, had shed all of its authority. He sounded uncertain in a way I had not heard from him in years. I turned to face him across the table and 14 guests. "Ask her," I said. My voice was clear and entirely steady. "Ask Waverley about the numbered company registered in her name and what it has been receiving from the home equity line of credit attached to my property for the past 19 months. And then ask her about the refinancing documents with the forged signature." I reached into the pocket of my dress, took out my phone, and placed it on the table open to the first photograph. The refinancing agreement, dated 22 months prior, with the wrong signature on the owner's line. Damien picked it up. I watched the change move through his face as he looked at the image and understood what he was looking at and what it meant for the very confident position he had been occupying 20 minutes ago. The property is under an emergency legal dispute order as of this afternoon, I said. Neither of you can transfer or refinance or make any claims against it until the civil proceedings are resolved. My lawyer will have the full documentation file to Toronto Police Services by Monday morning if this isn't handled through the civil process. Waverly's phone kept vibrating. Someone at the table, I don't know who, let out a very quiet breath. I'll extend you the same courtesy you extended me 20 minutes ago, I said to my husband. Except I'll be specific about the terms. You and Waverly have 30 minutes to take what you need for the next few days and leave my property. If either of you is still here when that time is up, I'll call the non-emergency police line, and trespassing charges get added to the file. Damien opened his mouth. He closed it again. No one at the table moved to stand beside him. His colleague from work was looking at the far wall with great concentration. His cousins were looking at their plates. My mother was looking at me, and the expression on her face was not the careful, contained smile she had been holding in place all evening. It was something else, something I had not seen directed at me in longer than I wanted to admit, and I understood in that moment how much I had missed it. 29 minutes later, Damien and Waverly carried 2 duffel bags and a soft-sided suitcase down the front porch steps and loaded them into the back of his car. It was a clear September night, the kind Toronto gets when autumn finally starts meaning it. Cool and quiet, the street lamps throwing long yellow shapes across the road. I stood on the porch and watched his car back out of the driveway and turn west and disappear around the corner. I stood there until I couldn't hear the engine anymore. Then I went back inside, put the kettle on, and sat with my guests until midnight. The months that followed were not simple, and I want to say that honestly. Legal processes are slow in the way that careful things tend to be, methodical and document-heavy, and not designed around the pace of an actual life being held in suspension. Damien and I communicated almost entirely through our respective lawyers. We spoke on the phone once, briefly, and he said he was sorry. I believed that he meant it, and I also understood that believing someone and forgiving them are different things, and that neither one required me to undo my decision. The CRA compliance review moved faster than I expected. Within 6 weeks of my tip line report, my sister-in-law's business accounts had been frozen pending formal audit. The preliminary assessment identified irregularities exceeding $73,000 in HST remittances across 4 fiscal years, falsified input tax credits, primarily, the kind of filing pattern that looks like paperwork error until someone looks at it closely enough to understand that it isn't. Her boutique closed before Christmas. She gave up the condo in Mississauga she had been renting and moved in with a relative outside the city. From what I understood through people we had once had in common. The civil case on the property was resolved through a consent order 4 months after the dinner. Damien relinquished all claims to the house and to any equity derived from the fraudulent refinancing in exchange for the civil fraud proceedings being stayed at the registration stage rather than going to a full hearing. My lawyer recommended the arrangement. I accepted it. The house was mine again, cleanly, entirely, the way it had always been meant to be, the way my father had intended when he spent 40 years making it possible. I did not sell it. I had thought about it. In those first weeks, I would sometimes walk through the rooms at night and think about starting somewhere else. A condo in a different neighborhood, a rental, while I figured out what I wanted the next part of my life to look like. But the more I sat with it, the less that felt like freedom, and the more it felt like surrendering a second time to something that had already taken enough from me. The house was mine. My father's name was in the executor records that proved it. I was not going to let anyone else's choices take it from me, now that I had it back. Instead, I replaced the kitchen countertops I had been planning to replace for 4 years. I converted the spare bedroom into a proper home office. I took on 3 new consulting contracts that winter, and, by the following spring, had left my salaried position to run my own practice full-time. By summer, I had 2 part-time contractors working alongside me. The floors still creak in the hallway, the same way they always have. The porch railing still needs a coat of paint, and I keep putting it off in favor of things I find more interesting. My downstairs neighbor's tabby cat still stations herself in the garden every morning with an expression of complete professional dedication to the birds in the birch tree. And every Saturday evening when the house is quiet and the September light comes through the front window at its particular late afternoon angle, I think about that dinner table and the woman who sat at it for 6 years trying to take up as little space as possible. She was wrong to do it that long, but she was the one who finally stood up. If you have ever been told to apologize for simply being present in a space you are always entitled to be in, I want you to know that the moment you stop waiting for permission is the moment everything changes. It doesn't always feel like power when it happens. Sometimes it just feels like pushing back a chair and walking slowly around a table. But it is exactly the same thing. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done standing at that table? I read every single one. And if you've been here for a while and haven't subscribed yet, this is the week to do it. I'll be back next week with another story.